The night Reggie asked me for a favor, I didn't even blink. We'd been best friends since middle school. Loyalty wasn't something I questioned, not with Reggie. I ran a small mechanic shop on the edge of town, barely making ends meet. Reggie worked the front desk, keeping things in order while I handled the cars. We didn't have much, but we had enough. That night, though, something was different. Reggie was jittery, pacing the garage floor like a caged animal. His eyes darted to every window, every shadow. He pulled a duct-taped package from his bag and held it out to me. "Just keep it here for a day, all right?" he asked, voice cracking. I looked at him, then at the package. It was heavy, misshapen, and the tape was frayed like it had been handled roughly. I shrugged. "Sure, man. Just a day." Reggie nodded, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and something else. Fear. The next morning I was wiping down a carburetor when I heard the bell over the front door jingle. 2 men in suits walked in, the kind of suits you don't buy off the rack. Their faces were hard, and their smiles were thin, like they were barely containing something dark beneath the surface. The taller one spoke first, his voice smooth but icy. "We're looking for a lost package. Might have ended up here by mistake," he said, his eyes boring into mine. My gut twisted, but I played dumb. "I'm not sure what you're talking about," I replied, trying to sound casual. The other guy, shorter and stockier, stepped closer, his smile dropping. "Maybe you should think real hard, friend. It's important." My heart pounded, but I shook my head. "Sorry, nothing like that here." They exchanged a glance before turning and leaving, their footsteps echoing through the empty shop. As the door closed behind them, I exhaled, realizing I'd been holding my breath. Later that day, Reggie showed up, his face pale and sweat beading on his forehead. He pulled me aside, away from the cars, away from anyone who might overhear. "I messed up, man," he whispered. "That package, it ain't just money. It's worse." I stared at him, my chest tightening. "Worse? How?" Reggie swallowed hard, his eyes darting around like he expected those suited men to burst in at any moment. "I stole it from a mob dealer. It's not just cash, it's leverage. Names, deals, things that could get people killed." My head spun. "And you brought it here?" He nodded, his face twisted in regret. "I need your help, man. I need to get it back to them, or we're both screwed." That night, Maria, my girlfriend, started acting strange. She was distant, her eyes avoiding mine, and I caught her whispering on the phone, her back turned to me. "We need to get out before it's too late," she said, her voice low but urgent. My blood ran cold. When she hung up, I confronted her. "What's going on, Maria? Who were you talking to?" She looked at me, her face a mask of innocence. "No one. You're imagining things," she said. But her eyes told a different story. They were full of fear. Reggie and I decided to track down the man he stole from. We found him in a seedy bar downtown, nursing a drink like it was the only thing keeping him alive. Reggie approached, trying to talk, but before I knew it, he pulled a gun, his hands shaking. The man looked at us, then laughed, a deep, chilling sound. "You boys are dead men," he said, his eyes cold. My stomach dropped. This was spiraling out of control, faster than I could handle. The next morning, Maria was gone. No note, no call, just an empty apartment. I went to the shop, my mind racing, and found a note stuck to my windshield. The handwriting was messy, rushed. "She's safe if you give us Reggie." My hands shook as I crumpled the note, my chest tightening with a mix of fear and anger. I called Reggie, my voice barely holding together. "We need to talk. Now." When I found him, he looked like a ghost of himself. Pale, eyes hollow. Before I could say anything, the shop door swung open, and Maria walked in, flanked by the 2 men from before. She didn't look at me. "I had to do it," she said, her voice breaking. "They said they'd let me go if I gave them Reggie." My heart shattered as the taller man grabbed Reggie, pulling him towards the door. Reggie didn't fight. He looked at me, a sad smile on his lips. "Guess loyalty has a price, huh?" he said before they dragged him out. Maria stayed behind, tears streaming down her face. "I had no choice," she whispered. I stared at her, the weight of everything crushing down on me. The package, it wasn't just leverage, it was a hit list, and Reggie's name had been at the top. My choice to help him had cost me everything. Maria, the shop, my best friend. Reggie was gone, and I was left standing in the empty garage, wondering if loyalty was worth the price I'd paid. Story 2. Alan had been living next door for years. Retired cop, always waving from his front porch. When I moved in with my wife, Karen, he was the first to introduce himself, offering beers and a barbecue invite. He was friendly, maybe too friendly, but I didn't think much of it until strange things started happening. It started with a note. Karen found it slipped under our door, typed with no return address. It accused me of cheating, throwing out details that were close enough to sting, but just vague enough to be lies. Karen was shaken, her eyes red when she showed it to me. I laughed it off, but inside I was rattled. Who would do something like this? Alan, hearing about it later, was quick to offer help. "I've seen cases like this," he said, his eyes narrowing as if he was back on the force. "Someone's targeting you too. Let me know if anything else happens." I appreciated his concern, but a part of me couldn't shake the unease I felt when he spoke. Soon after, Alan began spending more time around our place, especially when I wasn't home. Karen said he'd drop by, bring over groceries, or just sit and talk with her. He made himself indispensable, offering her advice, helping her out with small repairs. And Karen seemed to trust him more than she trusted me. Whenever I questioned why he was always around, she'd get defensive. "He's just being nice," she'd say. One night, I noticed someone watching the house, a shadow moving just beyond the glow of the streetlight. I crept out the back door, my heart pounding, and caught sight of a figure standing in Alan's backyard, staring up at our bedroom window. I called out, and the figure ducked away, disappearing into the dark. The next day, Alan was at our door, asking if everything was all right. His smile was warm, but his eyes, those eyes, held something else. Karen's behavior started to change. She was distant, her laughter gone, her eyes dull. She flinched when I touched her. One night, she told me Alan had warned her about me. He said I was acting controlling, that maybe I wasn't being honest with her. I couldn't believe it. Why would he say something like that? But she believed him. She trusted him over me. Then one morning, Karen was gone. I woke up to an empty bed and a single text message. "Don't try to find me." My heart sank. Alan was the first to come over, the first to offer comfort. He put a hand on my shoulder, his voice steady. "She'll come around," he said, but his concern felt rehearsed, like he'd practiced the lines in front of a mirror. Desperate, I broke into Alan's house while he was out. I needed answers. I found them in the basement. Photos of Karen taken without her knowing, surveillance shots of our house, a journal filled with ramblings about her, about how she was meant to be with him, how I was in the way. My hands shook as I flipped through the pages, bile rising in my throat. He had manipulated her, twisted her against me, driven that wedge so deep that she left. By the time I realized the truth, it was too late. Alan had taken her somewhere, vanished without a trace. I went to the police, but they found nothing. No leads, no sign of Karen. Alan's true nature, calculated, obsessive, had shattered my life. And now, I was left chasing a ghost, a trail that led nowhere, with nothing but the empty echoes of the life I used to have. Story 3. When you drive for a rideshare app, you meet all kinds of people. Most are forgettable, some are trouble. That night, a man in a suit flagged me down, offering $500 in cash for a ride. He looked desperate, but harmless enough. I should have driven off, but money talks, and I needed the cash. It was late, the streets almost empty, and the way he waved me down had a certain urgency to it. There was something off about him, but I figured it was none of my business. Besides, $500 was a lot of money for a short ride. He slid into the back seat, his eyes darting around like a hunted animal. "Downtown," he said, his voice clipped. I nodded, pulling away from the curb, trying to ignore the way he kept glancing over his shoulder. It wasn't until we were halfway there that things got weird. He leaned forward, his breath hot on the back of my neck. Change of plans. I need to pick something up at a hotel. He flashed another $500 bill, and it landed on the passenger seat next to me. Against my better judgment, I turned the wheel and headed for the hotel. He jumped out, telling me to wait, and disappeared into the lobby without another word. An hour passed. I checked my phone, the clock ticking past midnight, the seconds dragging on like hours. My patience wore thin, but just as I was about to leave, he reappeared, carrying a briefcase. He slammed the door shut, his face pale, his suit rumpled. "Drive!" he barked, glancing nervously out the back window. I started the car, and that's when I noticed the black SUV parked across the street. It tailed us as soon as I pulled away, keeping a steady distance. "Lose them," he said, throwing another $500 into the front seat. My heart pounded, my hands tightening on the wheel. I took a hard right, then a left, the tires squealing as I pushed the car faster. The SUV followed, relentless, its headlights glaring in my rearview mirror. My pulse raced as I wove through the city streets, trying to shake them. The man in the suit kept looking back, his face twisted with fear, muttering under his breath, urging me to go faster. I pulled into a gas station, my nerves frayed, my hands trembling as I gripped the steering wheel. I needed help. I told him I was going to call the cops. His hand shot out, grabbing my arm, his fingers digging into my skin. "No cops," he hissed. "They can't help. You're safer with me." His eyes were wild, desperate, and something about the way he said it made my blood run cold. The intensity in his voice, the fear in his eyes. It was enough to make me believe him. I put the phone down, my heart pounding in my ears, the adrenaline making my hands shake. We were back on the road, an empty stretch of highway ahead of us, when the SUV rammed us from behind. The car lurched forward, my head slamming into the steering wheel. "Faster!" he yelled, pulling out a gun, the barrel glinting under the dim dashboard light. My vision blurred as I floored it, the engine roaring in protest. The SUV rammed us again, harder this time, and I fought to keep the car on the road, my knuckles white as I gripped the wheel. The man beside me cursed under his breath, his eyes darting to the side mirror, watching as the SUV closed in on us. The road twisted and turned, the darkness pressing in on us from all sides. The headlights of the SUV grew larger, closer, and I could feel the cars struggling under the pressure, the tires skidding on the pavement. We reached a warehouse on the outskirts of town, the building looming like a shadow in the night, its windows dark and empty. He shoved the briefcase into my hands. "Take this inside or we both die," he said, his voice a harsh whisper, his eyes wide with panic. My hands shook as I took the briefcase, my mind racing. What the hell had I gotten myself into? The weight of the briefcase felt like a lead weight, pulling me down, the reality of the situation finally hitting me. Inside the briefcase were documents, names, dates, transactions, evidence of something big, something dangerous. He was a whistleblower, running from powerful people who wanted him silenced. My stomach twisted as I realized the weight of what I was holding. This wasn't just about money. It was about exposing a corporate scandal that could bring down people with power, people who wouldn't think twice about killing to protect themselves. The man's face was pale, his eyes hollow as he pushed me toward the warehouse door, his voice a low growl. "Go, now!" The warehouse was empty, dark, the air thick with dust and the scent of mildew. He pushed me forward, using me as bait, his footsteps silent as he slipped away into the shadows. I heard the SUV pull up outside, the doors slamming, the sound echoing through the empty space. My breath caught in my throat as I clutched the briefcase to my chest, my heart pounding in my ears. He had left me alone, the briefcase heavy in my hands, my mind spinning with fear and confusion. My heart pounded as I heard footsteps approaching, the echo of their boots on the concrete floor growing louder, closer. By the time I understood what was happening, it was too late. He had used me as a distraction, a pawn in his game, And now I was alone, caught in the middle of something far bigger than I could comprehend. The SUV guys burst in, their faces cold, their eyes locking on me with a predatory gleam. I was left with the evidence, incriminating documents that meant nothing without a way to prove my innocence. The man in the suit was gone, vanished into the night, and I was alone, caught in the crosshairs of dangerous criminals with nowhere to run, no way out. The weight of the briefcase seemed to crush me, the reality of my situation sinking in as they closed in, their footsteps echoing in the dark, the silence stretching out like a noose tightening around my neck. Story 4. Lisa came into the bar just before closing, messy hair, torn jacket, shaking hands. She begged me to let her hide in the back room. "He's coming for me," she said, glancing at the door. I should have called the cops, but something about her desperation made me hesitate. 2 men came in minutes later, dressed in plain clothes, flashing badges and asking about Lisa. Their eyes were cold, and the taller one leaned over the bar, his voice just above a whisper. "We're looking for someone. You seen a woman come in here?" I lied, shaking my head, pretending I was busy wiping down the counter. They exchanged a look, and for a moment, I thought they might push past me and search the place. But instead, they left, the door swinging shut behind them. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I went to the back room where Lisa was hiding. She looked up at me, her eyes wide, her breathing still frantic. "They're gone," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. She swallowed hard, tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm not running from an ex," she whispered. "It's the law. They think I did something bad. But I was framed. It was a robbery, and it went wrong." Her voice cracked, and she buried her face in her hands. I didn't know what to say. The desperation in her eyes, the way she seemed so utterly terrified, it made me want to believe her. Hours passed, the bar now empty, the lights dimmed. I kept Lisa in the back, my nerves on edge. I couldn't shake the feeling that those men would come back, and they did, this time with a warrant. They pushed through the door, their faces hard, their eyes scanning the room. "We know she's here," the shorter one said, his voice dripping with menace. Lisa was shaking, her fingers clutching my arm as she whispered in my ear. "They're dirty cops. They work for someone I crossed." My head was spinning. I didn't know what to believe anymore. The tension snapped when Lisa made a break for it. She shoved past me, her feet pounding across the floor as she tried to run. One of the men grabbed her, and they struggled, knocking over chairs and tables. I saw something fall from her bag, a gun, skidding across the floor, coming to rest near my feet. My stomach dropped. This wasn't just some innocent woman on the run. She was dangerous, more dangerous than she'd let on. After they subdued her, the men dragged her out, but not before the taller one turned to me. "You're in deep now," he said, his voice low. "If you know what's good for you, you'll hand her over next time." The words hung in the air long after they left, the bar eerily silent. I locked up, my hands shaking, the weight of what had happened settling in. I stepped outside, the cold night air hitting me like a slap. The 2 men were waiting, leaning against their car. "Where's Lisa?" the shorter one demanded, his tone leaving no room for argument. Lisa had manipulated me, and I'd fallen for it. She wasn't framed. She had killed someone during that botched robbery. My stomach twisted as the realization sank in, the truth like a knife to the gut. The men were real cops, and by the time I decided to tell them what I knew, it was too late. Lisa had slipped away, vanished into the night. I was left standing in the dark, her mess in my hands, the gun, the chaos, and no way to prove I hadn't pulled the trigger. The sirens were already in the distance, growing louder, and I knew my time was up. I had protected her, trusted her, and now I was paying the price.